Good afternoon. No, it's still good. It's still morning. Good morning. I hope that most of you have gotten on the road and are evacuating. We are in the process. Had to get a lot of stuff prepared in order for us to leave, and then we will be leaving with a whole bunch of animals and heading to Austin, where my brother lives. All right. So I'm going to start on chapter 3. For I Survived Hurricane Katrina 2005. So remember last we left, it was the three characters. I think Abe was the boy who used to be their friend, and he was had gone through a few bad things in his life and has gotten a little rough and tough. And then we have Barry and Jay, who were working on comics, creating a comic for a competition, that they were hoping to win. And remember, we started off where Barry was stuck in the floodwaters, and a literal house was floating in the floodwater coming straight towards him. So that's where we are on I Survived Hurricane Katrina. All right, so there's not a lot of pictures in here, so it's just a little star. Barry turned and put his hands over his face, bracing for the feeling of teeth ripping at his neck, but nothing happened. And remember, it was the dog that Abe had sicked on the boys. So I bet Abe is kind of upplaying the dog. His dog's probably not mean at all. He peeled open his eyes and saw that Cruz was still on his leash, standing next to Abe, who was laughing his head off. Why did he think it was so funny to scare them? Barry wished he could find the courage to step forward and say, "Get off my property." So I was wrong. So Abe was just messing. Well, the dog still may be nice. So Abe was just messing with them, and he pretended to let Cruz off the leash. He had practiced that in the bathroom mirror, squinting his eyes to get a fierce look. But who was Barry kidding? He was about as fierce as one of Mom's peanut butter cookies. If only Barry was more like his father. Nothing ever got to Roddy Tucker. And then, as though Barry's thoughts had sent out an SOS, the front door opened and Dad appeared on the porch. "Hello there, Abraham," he said with a smile. Abe pulled Cruz closer and lost his usual "what are you looking at" glare. Suddenly he looked like the old Abe, the pudgy guy in the Saints jersey who tried to show Barry and Jay how to shoot layups. Dad had that effect on people. He could smile at a T-Rex, and next thing, they'd be making plans to have a burger together. Barry's dad was a little famous in the lower 9. His band, Roddy Tucker and the Blasters, played in jazz clubs around New Orleans. But Mom said that wasn't why people respected him. "Your father's got sweet music in his heart," Mom always said, "and everyone can hear it." Now Dad looked at... So I want to take a minute. What do y'all think that quote means? Your father's got sweet music in his heart, and everyone can hear it. Do we think that she literally means the music that he plays? And if you look, that's the whole thing of reading, figurative language, delving deeper into what someone says. So most likely, your father's got sweet music in his heart. She means that he is a good person and he has a good heart, and that people can see that. So when you meet certain people, sometimes you automatically know that's a really good person. They've got a good heart. And I'm pretty sure that's what she means by that. Everyone who meets Barry's dad automatically feels at home and comfortable, and they know that that person will help them out no matter what. Now Dad looked at Barry. "We're leaving in an hour," he said. "You need to pack up. That hurricane's getting nasty. It looks like it might be a direct hit on the city. We're leaving town." Now that sounds familiar. We're going through all that too. Barry stared at Dad. "Leaving town for a hurricane? Not the Tuckers. Never before. Every year a few storms fixed their sights on New Orleans, and they always petered out at the last minute. There hadn't been a bad hurricane in New Orleans in 40 years. Was Dad making this up to get Abe to hustle on home?" "I'm serious," Dad said, reading Barry's doubtful look. "There's a mandatory evacuation. First time in New Orleans history." I did not know that. That's interesting. So the first time they'd ever been forced to evacuate, or told there was a mandatory evacuation. "What's that?" Jay asked. "It means if you can leave, you've got to leave," Dad said. "Your mom already called Mr. J. You're heading... Oh, I'm sorry. Your mom already called, Mr. J. You're heading up to Birmingham." "What about us?" Barry asked. "Houston," Dad answered with a sorry smile. Barry groaned. He loved Mom's Texas cousins, but all of them, 5 wild little girls and their grumpy mama, lived in a tiny little house. Barry always went home with a whopper headache after visiting them. Dad, too. The hurricane must be bad to get Mom and Dad to head to Houston. Barry looked around his neighborhood. The little houses, the scraggly lawns surrounded by chain-link fences, the palm trees and big oaks. He and Jay used to pretend that those big oak trees were ancient creatures rising from the earth's core. There were better neighborhoods in New Orleans, and sometimes Mom and Dad talked about moving to a block where police cars weren't always blaring their sirens, where Mom would feel safe walking after it got dark. But the Tucker family had been on this block in the Lower Nine for 70 years. Gramps had helped his daddy build this house back when folks kept hogs in their backyards. Barry couldn't walk half a block without someone shouting hello from a porch and waving him up for a chat and a glass of iced tea. The Lower Nine was home, and that was that. Abe started to slink away. "They're opening up the Superdome, Abraham," Dad called after him. "For folks without cars. You should get your grandma over to the stadium soon as you can." Abe waved and went on his way. Dad opened the door to go inside, and the news playing on the radio echoed out to the porch. "That's right," a man's voice boomed. "This storm is a monster. It's time to leave. Get out now. Get out while you can." "You heard the man," Dad said, starting to close the door behind him. Time to get moving. So that's the end of Chapter 3. So in Chapter 3, we met Jay's dad. Okay, we learned that Jay's dad is a really good person. We also learned that New Orleans hadn't had a major storm and had never been forced to evacuate in 40 years. Hadn't had a storm in 40 years and had never had a mandatory evacuation. We can relate to the story right now because we're currently under a mandatory evacuation. And that's one of the things you do when you read. You have to figure out a way to relate to what you're reading. Because if you can relate to what you're reading, you can understand it better and you can enjoy it more. Okay, so we know that Barry's dad's a good guy, and it sounds like Abraham probably won't have a place to go. Abe. He probably won't have a place to go, so he and his grandma might have Barry's dad wanted him to know that the Superdome was available for people to shelter in place. Okay, so we're going to do Chapter 4 real quick. It's the same picture. Barry's stomach did a few nervous flips. The news reports had been warning about Hurricane Katrina for days, but nobody in Barry's house had been paying much attention. Dad and his band had been playing shows in Atlanta. Mom worked full-time at Cleo's preschool. She also had a little business baking cookies for restaurants in the French Quarter, the fancy neighborhood across the canal. As for Barry, he was totally focused on Akivo. And remember, Akivo is the comic book character or graphic novel character that he and Jay created. A tornado could have sucked up the house and he wouldn't have noticed. But now Barry's mind started swirling. Like everyone in New Orleans, he understood what could happen if a strong hurricane struck. The city was surrounded by water. The industrial canal was just 2 blocks from their house. Big Lake Pontchartrain was up north. The Mississippi River wormed through the middle of the city, and so many canals and channels jutted this way and that. Barry couldn't keep track of them all. Of course there were levees, big walls of dirt and concrete that protected the city from all that water. But some people said that the levees weren't strong enough for a really big storm. Barry thought of Hurricane Betsy, the storm that hit New Orleans the year before Dad was born. When Gramps was alive, he loved telling Betsy stories. He and Gran lived in the same house. The levee broke and the Lower Nine flooded. 4 feet of water flooded the living room. It had taken 6 months to get everything cleaned up. But Gramps was always proud of how the house held up to the winds. "Barely lost a roof shingle," he liked to say as he patted the wall like you'd pat the back of a loyal friend. Those Betsy stories had fascinated Barry when he was little, but they'd always seemed like ghost stories and fairy tales, stories that could never come true. Now he wondered. "Barry," Jay said, waving his hands in front of Barry's face. "Snap out of it." "Sorry," said Barry, shaking himself out of his thoughts. "What about Akivo?" They had planned to walk to the post office after school tomorrow and send their package to Acclaim's offices in New York City. Barry had visited New York with Dad the past summer. The president of a famous college there was always inviting Dad to give talks about New Orleans jazz. "I'll mail him tomorrow," Barry said, "from Houston." "Let me have him," Jay said, holding out his hand. "I'll mail him from Birmingham." They stared at each other without budging, until finally Jay blinked. That settled that. Barry won the stare out, so he got to mail Akivo. Don't let anything happen to him, Jay said. I wouldn't. They stood there, like they always did before they had to say goodbye. No matter how much time they spent together, it always felt like there was one more idea to talk about, one more joke to tell before they went their own ways. Barry, honey, we've got to get ready, Mom called. It was time. Jay raised his hand toward the sky. Let me show y'all the picture real quick. So it's just the two boys. Jay raised his hand toward the sky, his pinky pointing up. It took Barry a few seconds to recognize the special move they'd invented for Akivo. So the energy from his secret power star, Beta Draconis, could flow from his pinky into his heart. I don't know how they do it. I don't know. Barry raised his hand too, and he and Jay linked their pinkies together in the air. So it's like a pinky promise. Barry smiled. For just a few seconds, Barry the believer imagined that he had a power star of his own somewhere. So we didn't get any new characters in here. Well, the mom's introduced, but I think she was in the third chapter. So Barry is now finally realizing that this storm could probably be really bad, and he's explaining why. New Orleans is surrounded by all the water. He mentioned levees. That's what was the problem. The levees broke, and that's what happened with Hurricane Katrina that made it so insanely devastating and fatal for so many people. Those levees broke and flooded, and it was just like something they had never seen before, or we had never seen before. So on that note, I've got to finish getting my stuff ready to evacuate. You can hear my dog outside barking. He wants me to let him in. Nobody's really looking forward to evacuating with 12 dogs and 4 special needs cats, but we do what we got to do. Hope y'all are being safe. Okay, and I'll see y'all later. And the due dates, I'm in the process of changing them. Don't worry about due dates on the notes. I'm going to change them to September 4th, which is next Friday, and we'll see how next week goes. I don't know if schools will still be canceled or not. If it is, the dates will change again. So, all right, bye.